Hi guys, it's Luetin here, and back for another Battlefield Roundtable. Now, I know a lot of you have been asking me when this series was going to come back. I want to just explain a little about why it's been a while since we had the last one, and the main reason, I guess, is just because Battlefield 4 had begun. It was the beginning of the game, and there was so many things changing with it all the time, so many updates coming in, and also I wanted to give it a chance to kind of allow the game to become established and not just kind of dive straight in, because there was almost too much happening. So I wanted to leave a little break, and that's why, I mean, the previous roundtables that we started, it was all once the game was established, so we could kind of talk quite, strongly about issues, and we knew that they were kind of concurrent in the game. But now we've had a good amount of time. Also, another thing is that you guys have got to remember that a lot of YouTubers and other people that we work with when we're doing these things have their own schedules, they have stuff that they're doing with their own work, and so it's very, very difficult to get kind of 4 people together at a time to sit down and discuss. And with that in mind, that's why we've got 3 people today. So I'm joined by Daskro and Jake in the Works Media. Hi, guys.
Hey. What's going on?
And yeah, so, power, guys.
Gotta sound manly.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, okay. So if you don't know this format, guys, if you're new to the channel, because I've had a lot of subs since I did the last ones of this, a lot of you are going to be freaking out about the fact that there's no gameplay on this. That's tough luck. You're just going to have to deal with the fact that this is basically a podcast for the next hour. But we're going to be talking about a lot of issues in Battlefield 4, mainly around the release and kind of our opinions and thoughts about that, as well as some information that's kind of coming out, because there's always new stuff coming out at the moment. So I guess let's first talk, guys, about the release itself and how that has gone. I think maybe not, we need to sort of take it in context over maybe a month or something like that, but I think it's definitely fair to say that there's been a lot of problems. I think, you couldn't not say that. There's been a ton of issues. Now, personally, for me, I feel like I've just been really lucky. I feel like I haven't had as many problems as other people. I have had days where I've like crashed out, some crazy stuff happening in the game, the sound bugs, all this kind of stuff. But through it all, I never really felt kind of so frustrated. I was like, oh man, I'm going to bin this game or anything. I always was having fun. It was just that there were some issues there. Have you guys had worse experiences or quite comparable to that, Daskro?
Well, I've had a pretty good experience thus far. I haven't had I had the sort of regular amounts of crashes on PC that a lot of people experienced for the first month. When the subsequent patches came out, my problems were resolved. Others, friends of mine that I play with regularly, not so much. They kept on having issues, and it was a real issue. But take in mind, I'm just playing on PC. I did get the Xbox One version, though, as well. Played that for a little bit. Haven't had any crashes on that, but I haven't played it for that much time, so I can't say that it's definitely not an issue for me either on Xbox One.
Yeah. Jake, what about yourself? How have you found it?
Well, I've had an okay time for I would say maybe like 60% of the time, but the other 40% has been kind of painful.
Painful or unbearable,
I mean, my biggest concern was never really, like, I wasn't having a ton of crashes. In fact, I didn't have crashes until the first, I think the 3rd update. I started getting crashes, and I still get them every now and then, but that doesn't really bother me. Long as it happens in between games, it's not really that big of a deal.
Yeah.
But the connectivity type of stuff, where it's based on like, hit detection, or as everyone likes to call it, netcode, that's something that I've been struggling with pretty heavily.
Yeah.
I still experience a lot of situations where I'll fire at a guy and he'll turn and I'll just drop dead instantly.
Yeah. I had that this week. I was literally having times where I'd moved to someone and I'd literally put a clip towards them, and I was like, I'm pretty sure that about 85% of those were on target, and yeah, they won't even get a hit marker, and then they turn around and drop me still, even now. And it is frustrating when that happens. It really is. You got to swear at the screen, but I mean, it's hard to know really what to say or what to do about it. Is it really?
I mean, one of the funniest things that I've been experiencing, not as much as I used to, but I'll shoot at a guy and I'll get no hit markers, and I'll think, okay, well, I didn't do anything to that guy. Then 5 seconds later, I get an assist, and then I start seeing hit markers on the screen. I'm like, what's going on here? And it's basically the server is like delayed, I guess, and giving us the information, the feedback.
Yeah.
And I don't see a lot of people talk about that particular thing happening, but I think that's part of the, I guess, delay that we're kind of having with the game. Somebody was saying on Reddit that it was something with the camera being delayed, that there's something from your vision, this isn't what the server is actually seeing. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we could talk about this for like an hour, but
well, let's get into that, because Daskro, didn't you mention about this with the what people are actually representing, what they're seeing when they're playing is not accurately representing?
Yeah, just to give a little context for those that haven't seen all the videos and topics about this, one of the issues is that the quote unquote netcode problem is this idea that you can have these exchanges with players on the server, and yet you, in your own perspective, you think that you are behind cover, and yet you get killed despite the fact that you're behind cover. Or alternatively, you try to shoot someone, and then you instantly get killed while you're shooting them, even though that you feel like that you delivered sufficient rounds to take the target down. The issues are multifaceted, and there's been a number of fixes here and there, but an observation that I saw and has now been recently posted by 99, a competitive Battlefield player, on his YouTube channel, is the issue of what the server is actually sending to the clients in real time as it relates to other clients' interactions. The best way to describe this is that even though that you are giving an X amount of data to the server in real time, the server is only updating the other clients of your interactions 1/3 the time that of the amount of data that you're sending to that server. So a best way to describe this is, many of you had seen the E3 footage, the E3 live footage where you had the two casters, Corey Dunn and Alex Mendez, and they were following people in first person using spectator mode. And a typical comment was, all these players are really bad at this game. They have really terrible aim. They can't hit their targets. We don't get it. The reality is that the players were no different than any other players out there. The difference, though, is that spectator mode is only receiving 1/3 the amount of interactions that are being transmitted from the server to the client, in this case, the spectator. So it looked like that even though that in first-person view, a given player was not aiming well at all, and yet they were still getting kills, it was really because the spectator is not receiving all of that data in real time, and as such, it compensates, and it looks like they're not actually playing. It looks like they're almost like using aimbot, when in reality they're not. And this was something that I had noticed back at E3, and something that I had asked the DICE developers, because I didn't view this in the context of netcode or anything else around those lines. I viewed it in the context of a spectator experience, because if you're spectating another first-person perspective, and yet they're a really good player and they're getting some really crack shots, but if what I am seeing from a spectator view is not that, but just someone who's just sort of twitching back and forth and not actually aiming and shooting people and yet still getting kills, that's a dissonance that doesn't actually help the spectator process. It actually creates this weird amount of uncertainty that casts doubt into what the viewers are watching in the first place. To which I was told that this was an issue that was with bandwidth more so than anything else, because if they increase the amount of data that was coming through, it would increase and the amount of bandwidth needed to send to all clients in real time, and this is a problem. But fast forward to right now, this also turns out to be, or at least a suspicion, that this could also have to do with the netcode issue, and that since you are, as a client, receiving chunks of what the other clients are doing 1/3 the time when you actually should be doing it, you actually have an additional latency put into the client on top of any latency that has to do with network connectivity. So if you have 100, crude example, if you're playing against someone with 100 millisecond ping, and you may actually experience close to anywhere between 150 to 200 milliseconds in additional latency total. When you're playing against that player.
It is. It's not. Yeah, it is. It's a very weird thing, and I think, like Jake says, it's a kind of, you got to say, it's kind of unacceptable. It's a bit of a weird one. I mean, you've got to kind of speculate why that would be. And my first thought may be something along the lines of, now, even though the next-gen consoles were quite powerful, they had to bring them up to be able to cope with the level of play that they wanted to have. They wanted to incorporate the elements of PC, plus they're putting in other stuff like Spectator and the Levolution. Now, Levolution is only one event, so it probably doesn't affect things that much, but nonetheless, there's a ton of extra stuff going on in there. I mean, Jake, Daskro, do you guys think that that's an element coming in there as to why they would do this?
I've played on Xbox, and from my granted, I have played a substantial amount of time less on Xbox One. I will say that the connection problem on Xbox One from my end was a lot better than
Mm.
on PC. So I don't know if that's really the case or not. I mean, this is like I said, this is a limited sample size. I may have just not been in the right servers and experienced it from the the proper angles, but it seemed like the connection problems on Xbox One weren't as bad. Now I've heard plenty of horror stories about like game crashing and like just having one hit kills on there from other people, but me personally, I haven't experienced it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Daskro as well. The other thing that I've mentioned in regards to this specific issue is that, like, if that's kind of hard coded into the game in essence, it seems curious, doesn't it, that you would have moments which seem to be kind of clear and perfect. Like, I have had plenty of times where I come around a corner and I'm like, bang, 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 dropping guys, hitting all my targets, and all the hit markers connecting, and I don't feel like any bullets are going stray. And then you'll have another time where the whole thing just goes out the window and it's just absolutely shocking, you know? I mean, that seems almost kind of too inconsistent, you know what I mean? If there's this element that's put into the game which is creating this kind of sort of imbalance for you in the game itself, you would think it would be more of a consistency, wouldn't it? Or am I not thinking right about that?
Well, I can't speak to the question of consistency because there are so many variables as it relates to your latency to the server, latency of others that you're playing against. But what I will say is that this is a big deal. And to both of your points, there's a number of additional aspects in Battlefield 4 in terms of the real-time physics, as well as all the various elements. I'm not talking about just evolution here. I'm talking about things like the sheer volume of small things that can be destroyed, anywhere from bricks to glass to desks to chairs, those kind of things, all has to be considered and delivered from the server to each of the individual clients, and that may bring additional bandwidth requirements into play. And one way that you can deal with that is that you can create this delay so that you're not having to send as much data to everyone as fast as if you need to. Now, that being said, if I were to take a guess here, let's just hypothesize that the bandwidth was the issue. If bandwidth's the issue, I'd imagine that this is more of a requirement that was put onto EA and DICE by Microsoft and Sony because they run their own hosted servers for all their servers. And as such, they may have certain standards which say that any given server can't have, on a per-client basis, this much amount of bandwidth utilized in a given time. Now, that again, that's just a hypothesis. I mean,
we're literally just speculating, but it's got to be something in that ballpark from my mind, simply for the fact that I can't think why else they would constrain themselves like that, you know? And I mean, the other thing is, I know the first thing that a lot of people will say straight away is, well, if you look at previous titles, games, you know, like Battlefield 3, and also when we go back to kind of like Bad Company 2, etc., where there was, in essence, maybe more destruction. Now, I know there is a lot of smaller destruction now in, say, Battlefield 4, but I don't know, I don't feel whether there's necessarily more small level destruction in Battlefield 4 than there was in Battlefield 3. So I wouldn't have expected to see any kind of massive significant change there in terms of actually how the game performs. But, you know, we've talked quite a bit about this one. Let's just go back to the actual release itself. Now, the release itself was it was definitely what would be shaky. I guess would be the best way to say it. But as I say, I personally had overall, I guess, a pretty good experience, as I've said multiple times. But I want to sort of say that, you know, a lot of people had really, really shocking experiences. Some people had very, very, very bad experiences. However, I think something we need to remember as well is that, you know, when people have their own PCs. Now, everybody has different PC setups, and with the consoles, though, we got to keep those guys in mind as well, because I'm a console player as well. And, you know, with consoles, you don't have that issue. So that's one thing that's kind of good about consoles, is that you have like the same setup. So when you have these issues, you can see, okay, well, look, everybody's got the same setup, so you know it's not that straight away. You know that there's sort of something else going on there. But with regards to PC players themselves, I mean, that's one thing that's kind of difficult, is that everybody has a completely, you know, sort of individual setup. So there's guaranteed going to be a percentage of players there where they're getting more errors or something because of the equipment that they've set up with, and it's not working the same way. And so, you know, that's why I may have a better experience than somebody else. Although I know I've been messaged by other people as well who have said, well, Luetin, my setup was basically the same as yours, and I have had way more issues. So again, there's that kind of massive inconsistency there. I think all in all, it's just been, you know, a very, very difficult release all around for everybody. It's been difficult for DICE, it's been difficult for the players. I think it kind of brings us around to the question of what is acceptable for a game release. Because, you know, a lot of people have been saying, well, I want my money back. I'm never going to play another title by Battlefield again, which I think is a kind of silly thing to say off the back of one title, but people are entitled to their opinion. But, I mean, with regards to sort of game releases and what people should expect, I mean, we're seeing more and more now of games being released and then being released on, you know, or being patched rather on the day of release. That often happens now, and games go out and they get patched straight away. Now, I'm sure you guys will all remember, as I will, that, you know, back in the old days, when a game was released, that was it. It just came out. There was no updating. So if there was anything screwed up in the game, they just would stay there. Now, obviously, we can't sort of, you know, we live in a different situation now, and so titles can be updated. That's a really awesome thing. It's a good thing that we can do this now. But on the other hand, it's kind of created this new problem that, you know, it would have been years ago that developers would try and bring the game to its most finished state before release because, you know, they've put a lot of time into that game to that point. So when the game then is released, well, they're like, that's you know, the deadline. Once it goes out there, that's it. They can't sort of refine it. They can't make any changes to it. Now they can go back and they can change and they can patch and they can update and they can do all of these things. So has that created more problems for us, Daskro, do you think?
Well, I think that the games have become orders of magnitude more complicated than they have in the past, especially when considering with Battlefield, you had 5 different platforms in which they were developing it on, 2 platforms of which were new platforms that may have their own bugs and issues with it at their respective release. But that being said, the Battlefield 4 release was quite horrendous. It was fraught with issues. It was fraught with bad experiences. I think little things such as playing the single player in offline mode and then beating it, but then logging back in and having none of your single players saved was a huge deal. And that burnt so many people from playing the Battlefield game because they felt like they had committed a similar amount of time to it, which they had, and yet it wasn't saved. They didn't get any of the progress saved, and it sullied their experience. This is unacceptable, and I can totally understand why people would not want to play future DICE titles because of that.
Yeah.
Now, and I really can't think. And I played every DICE franchise since Battlefield 42, and it's never been this bad. So it's really quite disheartening to see that this release was so unsuccessful. But that being said, they have been able to been very diligent about updating the game and patching it. That has relieved some of the issues. But regardless, people are still going to be sullied by the experience because people they give you one shot, and if you mess it up, that's the opinion they're going to have on you, regardless, because that's what happened. That's the experience.
Jake, for you, do you think it's been a kind of unacceptable release? Do you think they should have? Do you think they should have waited? Do you think they should have done more? I mean, where are you standing on this?
Well, I tend to always be on these kind of conversations, but it's the little things that bother me the most because it's obvious that the game didn't receive proper in-house testing. And I know there's probably a DICE dev that's like grinding his teeth right now if he's listening to this saying, oh, we played it a ton, but you don't do proper testing and things like the one-hit kill glitch, which I talked about in the beta, and it somehow made it to the final release. You know, the tank shell stuff, the revive problems that were going on for the longest time. It's just like those small little things that it seems like were just overlooked and are still being overlooked is what has made this so painful. I mean, granted, netcode and crashing aside, it's just things like that. I mean, when you play a game, you're like, wow, how did this happen? You know, how did a company that's got, you know, tens of millions of dollars to test this game, and, you know, they've had 2 years to work out the kinks, how have they not picked up on something so small? And that's the thing that I think has made their release kind of magnified, because I think if it was just the crashing and just the net codes, people would be like, okay, that's the main problems. But when it's all these little bitty problems on top of those really big problems, it's like, oh, this is a pretty big disaster.
Yeah, yeah. I think, a lot of people have been speaking before about they've perhaps bitten off more than they can chew, or as what was it, Level Cap said this week about the game being bloated, that there was too much in it. Now, it was interesting that he said that actually, because I remember speaking to, and I can't remember who, I've tried really hard this week to remember, but I did speak to I know people are going to be like, define your source, Luetin. No, I'm sorry, I really can't remember, but I swear to God, I spoke to a dice dev, and I think this was when we were in Sweden, and I spoke to someone, and we were talking about this, and I was talking about kind of putting enough stuff into the game and all these kind of things. And the person had said to me that they felt like they had, perhaps taken on too much and they were guilty of trying to do too many things in the game. Now, this kind of brings me to another interesting point, and this is something I've spoken about so many times before, which is how much new stuff do you put into a new release? Because this is the thing. Now, have they kind of, have they aimed too high? Have they burnt their wings on the sun? That's really kind of where I am on this, is that maybe they tried to do too much. But then again, did they? I mean, really, did they? I mean, what has Battlefield 4 got in terms of so many more things in the game? It's got different game modes. Okay, well, that's fine. But, I mean, are those things that should really break the game? I don't really see how they are, because a game mode is, in essence, basically just you're keeping score of something, to do in the game mode itself. You have a defined play area, and then you maybe have a couple of objectives. It's not really astonishingly complicated stuff, okay? It's pretty sort of straightforward. If you think about each game mode and actually what is involved in it, Conquest is pretty much as simple as you can get. You just have an area, you have a couple of points, you have to cap them. Okay, I'm not going to go through them all, but basically, having new game modes in there and having more game modes, I don't really see that should be something that causes a lot of problems there. The weapons, okay, we've got more weapons, we've got more attachments and all these kind of things. Now, that is going to be something that will cause issues, because the permutations of attachments for guns and so on, and the issues that could come up there, that does make things way more complicated. And then, of course, we come into the Levolution stuff. And the Levolution stuff, it's obviously they wanted to put something into the game which is kind of like a wow factor. And it definitely was that. Obviously, now it's starting to wear on people a little bit. It's not so impressive when you've seen it the 20th time, etc., etc. But it definitely, I mean, you can't deny it was something that when the game came out, everybody was like, holy crap. Shanghai, when you see the skyscraper fall for the first time, everybody's crowding around that. But the trouble is, as nice as those things are, they don't contribute to the longevity of the game, because once you've seen them for the nth time, it's not really that entertaining, and you don't even see it half the time as well. One thing I did like about the Levolution effects was the fact that it would actually change the battlefield, like on Shanghai when all the dust comes down. That's quite an awesome concept, the fact that it moves things around. But, okay, one other thing, the water, the way the water, I mean, God, that's so amazing. That really is kind of a really cool thing that's so new, and I've not seen anything kind of work that way before. But, when you're trying to make a new title, you end up in this situation where, how much do you put in? How much new stuff do you add? It's that horrible balance to strike, and it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's like, if you add too much, you run into perhaps a lot of problems. If you don't add enough, then people just keep... I mean, can you imagine, okay, if they'd just basically done Battlefield 3, but with a few new guns, a few new maps, maybe one new game mode, etc., didn't add anything else other than that, you know what people would be shouting? They'd just be going, oh, you've reskinned the game, you want our money, you're just farming, it's like COD, blah, blah, blah. But they add in all this other stuff, and maybe they just do too much, and they can't handle it, and the game doesn't, the game suffers because of that. So what would people rather have?
So on the topic of game modes not affecting, the way maps played, when we were at the some of the DICE events that we went to, we actually talked to some of the people, and they were saying how they actually worked different game modes into some of these maps, so the maps actually played obliteration specifically, because it was the big game mode for Battlefield 4. They worked them into these maps so they actually played properly, and it affected the overall design of the maps and the way these maps kind of played out. I know, for instance, Dawnbreaker, I had been discussing this with you guys, that Dawnbreaker is one of those maps that maybe didn't reach its full potential. I still consider that to be one of the strongest maps in the game, oddly enough, but I know that was one that was really heavily restructured in order to work well with obliteration. The same with Goldman Railroad. That map, to a lot of people on Conquest, just doesn't seem like... There seems like there's something off there. And I think it's because if you've ever played Obliteration on it, it's perfectly balanced so that there's bombs on each side, and you've got the the bomb in the center, and it plays awesome on Obliteration. I would say that's probably one of the most exciting maps to watch on it. But then when you play it on Conquest, you're kind of like, man, I'm either playing Ring Around the Rosie or I'm getting spawn trapped, because you've got these two center flags and you've got these three that are really, really close together. So what happens is you've got 4 tanks stacked up on one side, and you maybe have 2 tanks on the other side where they've got their 4 tanks stacked up. So it's really imbalanced in that respect. So I think game mode, I guess, when they take that into consideration, I think it absolutely changes the way the maps are designed. I think that's something that I think was a good point that Level brought up in his video, that maybe we don't want to be trying to make every single game mode work properly.
Yeah, and I think it does kind of highlights perhaps a bigger illustration of what the actual processes are going on there, that they're trying to sort of do something here, and they have all these ideas, they have all this stuff they want to do, but they just haven't had the time to implement it correctly or to the full extent that it should be, and so you end up with these kind of elements of things which are just kind of unfinished, don't work as well as they should do, and it's another reason to rein it back in, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, think about Caspian Border. That's a perfect example. Battlefield 3, obvious that there was something missing there. It just seemed like, maybe this isn't everything they wanted to do with Caspian Border. Well, take it to the next step in, Battlefield 4, they obviously took it where they wanted to go with it. I think Caspian Border is much improved over the previous rendition of it. So I think that's a great example of, like, sometimes them just not having the resources to make maps work properly. And they don't always end up being the initial vision. And like I said, with Railroad.
Yeah, that's actually a good kind of snapshot point. A lot of people were sort of saying about, with the Second Assault maps, why did they choose these specific maps? Now, there's obviously an element there of community, but you're right, actually. It's interesting that perhaps there were certain things that they wanted to do and couldn't do at the time, and then now they revisit it where they have enough time and maybe even perhaps a little bit more sort of resources, experience to do so, and they actually kind of produce the kind of more finished products. Although, as I say, it kind of highlights a rather unfortunate thing at the same time, which is it's a shame that they sort of can't initially do what they want to do with these things. Do you agree with that, Daskro? Do you think that that's kind of the deal, that they kind of tried to do too much?
I think the big differentiator for Battlefield 4 was really twofold. One, bringing 64 players to next-gen consoles, and then secondly, trying to differentiate themselves from Call of Duty in the respect and of Battlefield 3 previously of Levolution, both big Levolution in terms of what you just described, as well as miniature Levolution, the ability for buildings to collapse, for walls to be demolished, for the environment to change as you're doing it. And I think that while those were very big goals, those elements of it, by and large, were successful. But to Jake's point, it was all the little things that kind of got annoying that kind of made it different, such as the ability or the problems related to all the various guns attachments and QA testing those attachments accordingly. We haven't seen a whole lot of that yet, but the sheer volume of things that they have makes it quite difficult. And the same goes with perks and attachments for that matter as well. I don't know if this was simply a case of they didn't have sufficient QA testing or what. I know they have a large QA testing facility, I believe, in the South in the United States that is dedicated for this kind of thing. But did they do sufficient QA testing on all 5 platforms? Did they do sufficient QA testing as it relates to network connectivity issues? Did they create latency within the QA testing environments so that they could figure out whether or not it felt right or not?
So basically your stance is kind of make the game as big as you like, add as much stuff as you like, but just ensure that you test it to the max so that when you put that product out there, it does what it says on the tin, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where they create this sheer volume of content so that gives players options to do what they want to be able to do, even if they may not play every element of the game. And so, as someone who never plays Recon, it doesn't really bother me that there's 2 scopes versus 20 scopes. But I do like the fact that the tank attachments are quite tremendous, much more so than Battlefield 3, and it creates.
No, I know what he's going to say. I know. I'll let him say this in a minute. But go on.
Well, I mean, Jake, go ahead, because it actually, I think
it does.
It actually reinforces my point about.
Hold on. I want to say first, Jake has got this big bug on his shoulders, and he's like foaming at the mouth to get it off. Go on, tell us. Go on.
I mean, the thing I was going to mention is like I feel like they made the tanks noobish personally. And that's because the staff shell was put into the game.
You love it, man.
And I know a lot of people are going to get mad about this, but it's in the game because it's kind of evening the playing field. And I don't really see a reason for it to be in the game. I mean, honestly, like, I understand the premise behind it, but the fact that it also doesn't work right makes it like 10 times worse.
Can you explain? Explain to people about this, because
okay, so I got a lot of crap for Reddit on this, but I opened a can of worms when I essentially talked about a really small issue that would take 2 seconds for DICE to fix, but they have not done it. But you can essentially, on your third volley of shots, shoot your staff shell and your main cannon weapon at the same time, so you can quick swap. And what this creates is these tank battles that last 10 seconds, because you can reload both of your first round. You can reload those in about 5 seconds, and once your second staff shell is reloaded, you're boom, and that tank's destroyed.
Yeah.
Even if they pop APS, you just wait.
And if I can just say as well, like I because you'd spoken about this before, and I hadn't really encountered it, so I didn't know the frustration of it until this week. And I had, in 2 consecutive games, about 4 engagements with other tanks, and I came up on them first, and I got multiple hits on them first, and I still got taken down. There is no way that should happen. It was stupid. Totally I was going like, what's happening? This is just like, and they were all, I even got shots from like the side and the rear, and they were hitting me on the front. I should not have gone down, and it was because of that, you see.
Well, the interesting argument I've seen people make, which is a fair point, but it isn't logical, is that if you put that particular loadout on, you gimp yourself dealing with infantry, which is completely fair. But if you watch the particular video that I put up, I went on a 32 kill streak where most of my kills came from infantry using the Sabo and staff round.
Yeah.
So good tankers can direct impact, infantry, no problem. So it's basically creating this thing within the meta game, I guess you would say, of the tanks, where everybody has to run that, and that hurts the other vehicle balancing.
Yeah.
Because I know you can't, the IFV isn't made to take out tanks, but a skilled IFV player sneaking up on a tank can take out a tank, no problem. With this thing being in the game, it basically negates any sort of like skill or moment of surprise. I mean, it's basically whoever sees the person first and is smart enough to, avoid their APS basically wins within a 15-second window.
Yeah.
Which is a shame. I mean, that's just one of those little things in the game that is just detracting from the overall enjoyment.
Let me ask you as well. I mean, like what we were talking about before, do you feel with the actual release and kind of what they were trying to do with the release, I mean, surely it's better to aim high and try and reach that target than to not try and go, okay, we're just going to bash something out, isn't it? Is that a better thing to do?
Yeah, I'd say so.
You'd say so. I mean, because I just feel that we are entering into this. The reason I ask is I feel like we're entering dangerous territory here. And what I mean by that is the fact that DICE with Battlefield 4 tried to do a lot, and perhaps they didn't, hit all their targets in the release for the game. And as a consequence, they've received a lot of negative press. A lot of gamers seem to be kind of alienated because of this. But my concern is that gamers are extremely unforgiving. If there's any kind of thing that's not right, people lay the hammer down, and they're not shy about saying exactly what they think and being really unrelenting about it. But my concern is that gamers are really their own worst enemy, and in twofold. For one thing, what they demand. Okay, gamers demand everything. They want all new stuff, but they want the game to remain core. They want, so they're sort of asking so much of the company to sort of try and create this really interesting, diverse, new product, but keep it exactly the same as the previous ones, because that's what they love as well. So they're trying to do all this stuff there. So DICE try to do that, and again, potentially they've done too much there, and maybe for a few different reasons. But here's the danger. They've released the game, and I guess it's kind of gone down well, not gone down well. There seems to be a kind of 50-50 for me. There seems to be a lot of people obviously enjoying the game. There's a lot of people who have been really, really pissed off. But my main worry is that as a result of this, perhaps future titles will not have that same kind of high-reaching state, you know? They'll be like, wow, you know, we really reached too high here. Maybe that was not the right thing to do. Maybe when we release future titles, we just should change a few things.
Well, that's what Call of Duty's done.
Exactly,
If you look at Ghost was probably the most, which I have the displeasure of owning,
yes,
admittedly. It's probably the most bland Call of Duty they've ever released.
Exactly.
I mean, it's literally less than what COD 4 had.
And that's what I find so incredulous, is that, you know, people on the one hand, they have it already existing. They have all these other titles which do just churn out the same crap, you know. I've got to reference World of Warcraft because that was a huge game in my gaming history, as a lot of people know. But for me, that was one reason why I quit playing WoW, was because although they kept adding new content to the game consistently, new regions, new dungeons and stuff, people to fight, people to play, and so on, but the game didn't really change. It didn't really alter. Everything was the same. They just kind of were reskinning and redesigning things, and there wasn't really any new elements brought into play there. And even when they brought new races into the game, nothing really changed. It was the same stuff. And that's the thing, is when you start to kind of just produce the same thing, people just get bored, fed up. They don't want to play it anymore. So this is my point. Even though Battlefield 4 has been probably the worst release, arguably the worst release in the series or in the franchise of Battlefield, surely it's better, isn't it, Daskro? Isn't it better to aim high and try and reach that than to not try and just to churn something out, wouldn't you think?
Well, I think it's definitely more noble to aim higher as opposed to churn something out. But take it in consideration that there are numerous examples in the movie industry of series that have simply had a dozen different sequels to them that copy the same concept over and over again, and they still sell. Yeah. Look at the Resident Evil series. Resident Evil series is on its fifth sequel or sixth sequel, and if you look at it from a box office perspective, they keep on outselling the previous one. Now, eventually, that's gonna break, but that's a cash generator. And Activision has clearly gotten that down. Battlefield has not pursued that approach. Instead,
well, they tried.
The closest thing they're going to get to with that is DLCs with the premium package, because they're essentially getting their premium business model essentially is they're going to put out a certain amount of content that costs a fraction of what it would cost compared to building a new game. But from an earnings perspective, they're going to generate almost as much money as they would make from creating a whole new game. And so the business case actually closes quite well, but it's based on the assumption that the core game itself is fun and playable and sells a lot of copy, because you're not going to sell premium to any other person out there if the game at its core doesn't have a big and vibrant user base. And then one more thing before I want to actually go back to Jake's comment about Staff Shell. I actually agree with him quite a bit, and I'm a tanker. I've been tanking for the entirety of all the Battlefield games the last 10 years plus, and this looks very familiar to the whole canister shell issue in Battlefield 3, where you could quick swap from your main gun to canister shell, which meant that you could essentially be extremely effective against both infantry and vehicles because you could just quick swap from one to the next. I think it just from an intuitive perspective, if they're going to change canister shell in Battlefield 3, because there's no way conceivably that you can take two shells and quickly swap them back and forth, you should put a reload time on Staff Shell like anything else. That's contingent not upon the last time you shot Staff Shell, but instead the last time you shot any shell off your main gun. Yep. To me, that just makes sense. It is an easy fix.
And the funny thing is they do it with guided and the canister shell. So I don't understand. It's obviously not supposed to be like that, because it comes out of the same barrel. It's the equivalent of shooting a shotgun shell through like a muzzleloader.
Yeah,
I mean, exactly. It makes no sense. So
I think people are just saying that there needs to be a secondary option that has a more powerful loadout relative to alternatives. That very well may be the case. And clearly Staff Shell does have its uses depending on what you're talking about. But if you agree with that argument, then surely you would agree with changing canister shell to be identical to it. Because hey, in that case, you now have a super good loadout against infantry. Is that a problem? It probably is a problem for most people, because most people were complaining about it back in Battlefield 3. You can't have both sides of the coin on this. It's either one or the other.
And it's true. I mean, there's so many changes that have been made to things that you wouldn't think were necessary. Things like, for example, how ridiculously invincible the Scout helicopters are now. And, you know, I fly them, I love them, but my God, they're a force to be reckoned with. Then you also have got the weird changes made to the attack helicopters and how they attack.
Suck.
Yeah, you know, and to me, this seems absolutely mind-blowingly bizarre. You know, I actually had a good run myself. I just jumped on a server yesterday, and I picked, there was an attack heli free, and I thought, hey, whatever, I'll just jump in. I actually did pretty good with it. I got a few streaks, destroyed a few vehicles, but then once they realised I was a bit of a threat, I think maybe because I jumped in like halfway through a game, and I think maybe my team hadn't really, you know, taken it out to that point, so they weren't really paying that much attention. As soon as I got a few kills with it, I would take off, and it was just like beep, 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 and I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything. I was trying to use the buildings for cover, and then I had like different things shooting at me, the jets coming down on me, and you've got no chance. You can't go anywhere, you can't do anything. And, you know, even if you're a very, very good helicopter pilot, you can probably survive for a while, but compared to a scout heli, you know, you can't, you've got no way to repair other than putting it down on the ground, which is a big risk, and all these kind of things. It's just another issue that's ongoing there. But I guess I'm going to bring it round to another thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to the release of the game and so on, and that is the acceptability of it, but also the very interesting kind of deal we've seen as to regards sales. Obviously, sales were not kind of as good as they had expected them to be. And as a result, EA ended up releasing that statement talking about, okay, we're going to focus people on fixing the game. Now, I called this, there were a lot of people who were like, there's no more DLCs. And it was kind of like, yeah, I don't think that's actually how it's going to go. Yeah, it's cancelled.
Exclamation point.
Yeah, caps lock all the way for the video title. And I saw these things coming out, and I was kind of like, I don't think that's actually how it's going to be. And funny enough, a couple of days later, it turned out that's not the way it was going to be. But it just didn't seem to make sense to me that they put everything on hold. It's like, wow, what, you're going to damage yourselves more? And also the other thing that I thought was really funny was people going, oh, there's going to be no second assault. And it was kind of like, guys, I played it literally this week and it's finished. So what? Yeah, they're just not going to release it? So there's a lot of stupidity around there.
It's next. I guarantee you that is the next DLC.
Yeah, a lot of people have asked me this week, and I know now because of this, we're talking, people are going to be asking us, we don't know, guys, okay? This is actually another bugbear of mine. Why isn't, and Level Cap and me have had this before when we were talking about these DLCs and we were trying to make videos about it. It's why is there no scheduled release set? You know, how hard is it? All this stuff is made. Wait. They could just give a bloody list saying these dates, this is when it's coming. How hard is that? I mean, I know there's probably other issues going on there, but okay, well, this is maybe just a YouTube produced thing. But people like to know. People ask me on a daily basis, when is this coming? Why can I do this? There's nothing out there, and it's a massive pain in the ass. It really is.
Well, to be fair, Second Assault, when they signed that contract with Microsoft, it was a 3-month cushion.
Yeah.
So essentially, what you're going to get is Premium won't kick in until probably like March, I would say, with the next like couple installments, because it's not a 2-year cycle like it was, because they kind of got off to a late start in BF3. They're like, oh, well, this game sold really well. Let's introduce Premium.
Yeah.
But this time they're going to start it a lot earlier. So you've kind of got that dead zone in between when Premium kicks in and when China Rising is kind of old.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that, you know, around late January, early February, you get Second Assault, because they don't have to do anything. It's literally done.
Yeah. They
just push a button and there it is. It's out on all the platforms. But I don't know. It's not really that great, to be honest. I mean...
No, it's true. But anyway, okay, let's come back to what I was saying, though, which was that basically the acceptability of releasing a game in its current state and what we should expect as consumers. Now, obviously, the interesting thing that I found was that up to the point of when they made this statement, a lot of people obviously have been talking about the game, complaining about the game, flooding the forums with information, and some constructive, some not. But then I thought it was kind of fairly unusual that they actually came out with this statement. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I haven't seen that as a very common thing. I mean, obviously, if there's like a big issue in a game, a dev will often address it. But that was kind of an interesting one that EA actually kind of came and said, we're putting this down, we're going to, you know, get it dealt with. But then they immediately turned it around and was like, oh, no, you know, we're still going to sell it. And it was kind of like, okay, so you really weren't doing anything. This was just kind of like a PR stunt to appease people. And that was kind of what I thought was interesting. But really, when you look at it, it's kind of like, well, look, because of sales and because they realized there's this kind of damaging issue going on about people talking about things and it's not working. And they obviously felt like the need to get involved and go, okay, we need to kind of take hold of this situation and get it sorted, because this is a big, strong primary product for us. Now, a lot of people I had said to was like, look, you've got to vote with your feet. If you really feel that strongly about it, I don't. I'm pretty happy with the game. But if people feel so strongly about the game, you've got to vote with your feet and vote in terms of sort of, say, hey, look, I got this product. It doesn't do what they sold it to me on. I would like my money back. You should, you are entitled to do that. And that actually comes back to something else as well, pre-ordering. I have been a long-term advocate of not pre-ordering games. I also hate the golden carrot. It pisses me off. I don't like it when they sort of try to get you to, and this is not relevant just to DICE, there's tons and tons of, this is just very common now, that they will try to get you to pre-order a game and they will dangle the carrot and say like, hey, we'll give you all these skins or an extra gun or a special thing that nobody else has. And everyone's like, oh man, got to have that. And this game, it'll probably be okay. It's like, if you're a sensible consumer, you don't buy something without knowing how it is. And here's the key thing. Most products that you buy, okay, if it's from a reputable company, you usually can look at their products and you go, well, maybe I'll have an issue because it's new, but on the whole, their products are generally very reliable. So if I order this, it'll probably be okay. But with games, well, we know for a fact that when games come out now in the current time, when games come out, they often have a lot of issues that need to be resolved, that need to be patched. They're not often clean releases, and people can scream and shout and say that, well, they should be. Well, fine, you can scream that all you like, but I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen anytime soon. That isn't the world we live in, okay? Games don't work like that anymore. When they release, there's going to be issues. They're going to need to be patched, especially if it's a large online game, okay? That is just the way it is. But people really can make an effect by actually voting and sort of saying, look, if this is not up to scratch, I'm not going to buy it. I want my money back. But if people don't do that, well, then the companies are just going to look at the figures and go, well, there's a lot of people complaining, but hey, look, we're making a ton of money on this game and people are buying it. So maybe it's just the vocal minority that are being really loud about it. They're not really, people are buying the game, so they must like it. And that's the kind of worry there. But I think, do we need to move away from this culture? Do you think, Daskro, it'd be a better thing to move away from this kind of attitude of, oh, we'll put it out there and then we'll update it? Do you think, companies should spend a longer time to produce a fully complete, as close to perfect game as they possibly can? Or do you think that it's almost unstoppable now, that we've sort of got into this culture and that's just how it is? What do you think about it?
I think that if they have a business model in which they derive a good portion of their profits off of DLCs and other expansions off a core game, that it is essential for the core game to come out and have as few bugs as possible. And I think that's one of the big issues here in that respect. Now, that being said, as you mentioned, the EA had come out and said they were stopping production on all DLCs, and there's a little bit of backtracking. I don't know how much of their how off they were on their sales forecast, and clearly the market reacted when they said they were going to postpone or perhaps stop working on their DLCs. But at the same time, Call of Duty Ghosts also didn't meet sales forecast expectations either. Perhaps this has a lot more to do with sales as it relates to next-gen consoles rather than these two titles. Respectively.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I mean, if you look at the numbers, I mean, it's certainly sales for the next gen consoles have been lacking.
Yeah.
For as titles go, because I mean, I think they've both sold under 1 million, if I'm correct. I think last time I looked, it was like, or both, as in like both consoles for Battlefield 4. I think it was like Xbox One had like 800,000, and PS4 had nearly 1 million. I think it was like at 900 something thousand. So I mean, they're well. I think the last time I looked at the overall sales figures, they were like 60% behind what they were expecting, which is pretty high. Because I mean, they sold what, 16 million Battlefield 3. I think they're at like 6 million total, and there's 2 extra platforms. So
yeah, I can't speak to what all their expectations were, but I will say that if Call of Duty Ghosts was selling like crazy, then maybe EA would have reacted differently. Yeah. But for right now, they are trying to change course, and that's good. But I really do think that if EA and DICE want to maintain this strategy of focusing so much on premium and DLC content, they have to have a core game that works. Now, this may have just been a perfect storm of next gen consoles that are buggy, or buggy isn't the right word. They're new consoles with hardware that may not be as mature. It may have been a combination of NVIDIA and AMD not having the appropriate driver support they need to have in a timely manner. It may have to do with the fact that DICE was trying to release this title on 5 different platforms. Yeah. There are going to be a number of factors in why this happened, and many people will go back to this very crude and basic argument that EA forced them to do this. EA forced them to put out the game when it was put out. There may be a factor into that, but there are so many other variables here in terms of that could create issues with this. That in retrospect, in hindsight's 2020, I'm not surprised there was as many issues as there were. It was a very ambitious game to develop, given all of these conditions.
But I still say I'd rather that than have a game which is just bashed out, I'd rather have that. I'd rather have a game come up and, things go wrong and it's a learning experience to take forward, and they say next time, okay, well, what we did was really good, but we're going to take the time to really test the game to, bring that core level up. And I think, just as a kind of aside related to that, if you look at kind of, even though things economically all around the world are quite difficult, I think one thing that, if you look at what people spend their money on now, people spend their money on quality more than anything else, If you just look at the kind of general technology people have around in terms of, Apple products and stuff that people, like iPhones and all this kind of stuff, or if you buy, the Samsungs and everything, people they want quality products. And I think that's the key issue there, is that, people want a good, strong, well-produced product. And if you make it, people will buy it. And I think that, and it doesn't just apply to that. If you look at just people's shopping habits in general, a lot of people are making kind of more informed choices than ever before. They're sourcing their own, in terms of foods and things like this. Okay, some people will actually source them. I think people are just kind of generally more aware about the products and the things that they're buying. And part of that is just the world that we live in now, where there's a lot more kind of information available to everybody about every single thing. Times were that if you wanted to buy a product, you would have to literally go and physically research it. It's a bit laborious, so you maybe would just ask someone's advice. Well, hey, now you can just go online and you have like millions of people's advice. So people are so much more informed about their products and what they should then expect of those products. And so that's another reason, I think, why when something comes out and it's not what they expected, or it wasn't what they were sold on, they're so much more unforgiving. They come down so hard because they feel like, hey, look, this is not how the game is played anymore. We expect high quality. And also, let's not forget, I mean, this isn't like some indie game. It's a AAA title with million dollar companies. So they really should be producing titles at the top level of the game. And I think that's another thing. But again, that's something else to perhaps learn going forward into the future, that they sort of take this on board. But I really still do feel that I wouldn't want to see them have done less than they did in this game. I just feel that they maybe should have delayed it back. But I mean, do you think that's better? Do you think we should end up in a kind of a Rockstar situation where they spend years and years and years on the game, and then they release the game, and for sure, really, really quality game, but people wait for it? It's interesting because I guarantee you in the comments, everybody will agree and say, yes, let us wait for the game, but make it absolutely perfect. I mean, you guys, would you agree? Wait for the game, but make it perfect?
Yeah, probably. But I mean, I understand the business side of things and their, I guess, attempts to get things out towards the end of the year.
True.
Because there's no secret that even a broken game would probably have sold more than a perfect game in March.
Yeah. Well, they're not going to sell any more, are they? That's the point.
What do you mean they're going to sell any more?
Well, okay, all right. Sorry, I didn't word that exactly correctly. What I mean is like you do have your core audience, okay? So even if you make the game 100% perfect, I mean, how much? I think that's what Jake's kind of saying there when he says it's a broken game, okay? If you release a broken game, well, I don't want to call it a broken game.
I think
if you release a game that isn't up to par compared to a game that's absolutely perfect, what's that differential there? You know, what's the net between of kind of how many more sales do you make, and therefore is it kind of relevantly cost effective to spend an extra year on the entire game? Not so sure that they would see it that way. You know, I mean, they've got to get their product out there, they've got to pay people's livings and so on and so on. So
it's about reputation. I think probably is the thing
true.
that would hurt the most. Would be the next rendition, which we already talked about a little bit. But
yeah, and I must say that that now I have not seen. I have not got into a lot of quantitative analysis on this topic. I'd like to, but the one thing that I would mention here is that I don't think that they have lost that many sales relative to all things considered, because that core constituency still bought it. Now, granted, there's a small portion that refunded their money. I get that, but I would look at the ratio of how many next-gen consoles were sold versus how many Battlefield 4 copies for those consoles were sold. If it met their expectations or met sort of the standard that's usually in place, then no, it didn't have a big impact on things. But it very well may have. That being said, take in mind that in Battlefield 3, a majority of the sales did not happen within the first 5 months release.
Yep.
They went from about 12 to 13 million copies sold within the first 6 months to, at the end of the game, they're around 21. And so they had sold a tremendous amount of Battlefield 3 after the fact. Now, granted, there were sales and everything around those lines. So from a business side of things, it may not all be equal. But there is going to be a significant portion of their sales. They're going to happen in the next 8 to 18 months. Yeah. And so for those players, they may not have as bad experience, but at the same time, they may not buy the game because of all the bad press that has come out about the game in its current form.
This is true. And, you know, the initial release is very important for many reasons, but also when it comes to DLC and also premium services and things like this, the trouble is as well, DLC and premium don't sell as well for obvious reasons. One of the main reasons DLCs don't sell so well is that they often don't get as much marketing, because a lot of the kind of news corporations and stuff like this, not corporations, sites and businesses, IGN, just people like this in general, that's off the top of my head, IGN and other things as well, but they just don't promote those things as well, because they're not really like a new product. It's just kind of part of it. So producers like you guys and me will obviously cover them in detail and we'll go through them, and that's why people watch YouTube channels for those kind of content. But the larger things, they just don't get pushed out there in terms of media content, so they don't get as much advertising, and overall that does have an impact. So
that's why you see those like season passes and you see premium.
Yeah,
I think actually premium from a business standpoint was ingenious, because they're getting you early on, because they're like, hey, if you want to get the most out of Battlefield, you need to get this, so you can get these battle packs, which will help you in the first couple of months. And, you know, that was the kind of thing that when people are interested in the game, they buy it, and then they may not even care 3 months down the line. But EA is like, well, I've already got the money, so it's not a big deal.
That's a clever thing.
The cash flow cannot be underestimated here, or overestimated, excuse me. Them having all that cash in hand allows them a much greater amount of certainty as it relates to staffing, and as it relates to how much they're going to put into the types of content within each of the DLCs, as well as the updates to the game itself. We can only look at things like Medal of Honor Warfighter, where they stopped at one DLC,
which was free.
And it was free, and that was it. And then the studio was shuttered. The updates were less and less frequent, despite the fact that we're talking about an engine or elements of an engine that was otherwise supported by EA. It was shuttered because it didn't make the sales. It didn't have a big following to it, and as such, they had to close it down. That certainty is a big deal, because it means you don't close down studios. It means you keep people on the payroll doing things for the game, and that's a good thing. Now, is it a great thing for consumers? That's a whole other story, because that's to Luetin's point. That's a whole lot like pre-release. You're giving you are buying 5 DLCs worth of content for a certain amount of money, but you're only going to get them over a certain period of time. But the relative value that you're going to get at any given time is going to be a fraction of what you actually paid for. And so eventually that annuity, if you will, does come and reap its benefit when you create when the last DLC comes out. But this is, again, smart from an EA perspective, because if you look at the sales of expansion packs across all their games, such as Battlefield, it's quite apparent. The first expansion pack or DLC will sell quite well, but it will exponentially get worse in terms of sales over time, because your user base isn't as interested in playing, because they simply don't play their games. We live in a time right now, and I've mentioned this several times before, where there are free-to-play games, there are indie games. We are saturated with options of what to play and when to play them and how to play them, both on traditional gaming platforms as well as mobile, as well as web-based. So it's extremely difficult for a traditional expansion pack, non-premium based model to work, because the diminishing returns are just too great.
Well, the funny thing is well, it's the genius thing, honestly. Besides premium being a really smart idea, is that they add in the little bonus thing that literally doesn't hurt them at all of getting it 2 weeks early, because what that's going to trigger is these impatient people who are seeing all their buddies playing and are like, oh, shoot, even though I've already paid for China Rising, I'm going to buy premium and get it 2 weeks early, and then I'll get all the other DLCs. So it's that little bitty incentive, which I think really drives premium. It's kind of, I guess it's kind of tricksy, but that's the way businesses work. I mean, look at the timed exclusive of Second Assault. It's kind of the same concept.
Yeah.
Well, it's what value you bring off it, and there's some developers who find pre-releases or early access to be a punitive model for those that don't buy the service, and that is certainly a legitimate argument. But how do we go about? How does EA and DICE, or any game developer for that matter, go about creating an incentive system that isn't necessarily punitive to the overall player base? Can you? We look at Dota or CS:GO, where we see the ability to put essentially skin packs or gun decal packs that don't necessarily have a negative impact on our players. But again, another way that they can go about doing this. And with premium, they are offering that as well. But it's quite a smorgasbord of things that they are offering in terms of getting.
I just feel like, when regards to the complexity of the game itself and kind of what's going on there. Now, I had actually thought about this a lot before, but interestingly, I didn't think about it in regards to Battlefield. I thought about it in regards to COD. And the reason is that COD kind of, they didn't really know what to add to the game, Like, this is one of the reasons why it's gone so screwed up, is they didn't really know what to do with it. I don't think, anyway. I mean, they had so many core issues with the game itself in terms of stability and with latency, which was just appalling. I mean, this is the thing that makes me laugh, is like, if you think the latency is bad in Battlefield, you really should have played some previous COD titles. But yeah, the thing that I always remember with COD is that and this isn't just nostalgia at all, because I was planning to play with some of my guys that I know, but going all the way back to COD 4. Okay, now you speak to anybody, okay, and everyone's like, oh my god, COD 4 is the best. The reason COD 4 was such a good game is because it was a simple, strong core gameplay. That's what was so awesome about the game. The kill streaks were simple and to the point, okay? They had 3 kill streaks, all right? So it's UAV, jet strike, and then the helicopter. They're very simple. They do a task, and you just get them by racking the kills, okay? So it's straightforward, and it's to the point. The gameplay itself was fast and intense. They had enough attachments to keep it interesting, but not enough that it becomes kind of clumsy and overcomplicated. The gun setups as well, the selection of weapons, again, the same thing. It's kind of like enough to keep it interesting and varied, but not enough that it becomes overcomplicated, clumsy, and causes issues in the game, and then maybe it kind of becomes more important than it really is, you know? And I think that's what was so awesome about the game and the way that it played out. It was just the kind of fluidity and the intensity of the gameplay in that game was really spot on. But then as they went on through further games, every single title, they were kind of like, well, we've done this already, so I guess we've got to do something new, this and this and this and this and this. And now it's just this horrible mishmash of crap, you know. It's just, it doesn't even know what it wants to be anymore. It's just trying to do all this different shit, and it's just... It's just all over the place, and then it just becomes this horrific nightmare. And you know, Battlefield is nowhere near that point, but I feel that it could be if people don't kind of sort of get their heads down and sort of understand what it is that makes games really awesome. And you know, when we're talking about kind of DLCs and what you can add to the game, and also we talk about longevity, and you're saying things like, okay, so you know, we're saturated with games now, and so people have a very short sort of investment in games unless they're sort of dedicated players to the series. And this is entirely true, but it kind of makes me beg the question of kind of you know, is there a point of community there? Well, there is. I mean, you only have to look at certain titles. There's always going to be that core community. But obviously, if it's a very, very large title, they want to drag in more than just a core community. But what are they going to do that? And I think you have to look at COD 4, because COD 4 came out right at the very start of those the consoles back then, really, and it sort of set a standard. And the thing was that COD 4 just went on and on and on. It was so successful, and it played on. I mean,
Yeah, they still play it.
if you go down to the stores now and you look at the price of COD 4 compared to the same titles, it's still a comparable price. It's sometimes more expensive than other things. And sorry, I'm going to get off the topic of COD 4, but it's just a good example of how a strong title can sell and continue to sell and sell and sell and sell. And I think that is what needs to happen and needs to be identified, is that you need to just, like you've said, Daskro, as well, you know, you just need that strong core gameplay. Now, the interesting thing was that with Battlefield 3, they brought in the Close Quarters DLC. Now, a lot of people were kind of pissed off about this, and they were kind of like, oh, it's not Battlefield. To me, it was Battlefield, because it offered a different sort of style of gameplay to other FPSs within a kind of similar genre. So it had that kind of close fighting, but it still had the destruction of Battlefield, and so it brought a whole new level of intensity. But what I always felt with Close Quarters was that the core infantry gameplay was really strong. Now, Battlefield is always about big open spaces and the vehicles and the infantry, so you kind of have everything going on there. But I think kind of like when I played Close Quarters, for the first time of sort of replaying Battlefield, it took those other elements out. So in many ways, you kind of... You took a layer away, you know, it's like you scraped a layer away, and you saw this really fascinating kind of beautiful gameplay. That's what I always felt when I was playing Close Quarters. I had rounds where I was playing on scrap metal, and I was running around with an F2000, and it just felt so fluid, and like, you just go from point to point, and you're like hitting target, left, right. You'd flip around, run back up the stairs, hit a guy, turn back. You know, it was just that amazing kind of constant movement gameplay. And so I felt that was smoother and better than some other FPS titles, which were standalone, meant to provide that style of gameplay. And so that's why I kind of feel like that you definitely need to add more to a game whenever you're producing, you know, a new title. But I think that, like you've kind of highlighted as well, you need to have the strongest core gameplay that you can have. And I think that is way more important than any of this extra stuff that's put on there. When it comes to the amount of guns and attachments in the game, you know, it's kind of like Level said to me when we were doing another video, he was like, oh, you can never have enough guns, Luetin. And I know, because people love to have all this crap. They like to have all these different guns. But I would like to have seen less guns, less attachments, keep it nice and straightforward, to the point. I mean, for sure, it's fun to play around with the attachments. But when I look through some of the attachments, a lot of them do kind of pretty much the same things. They're just kind of chopped and changed. And, you know, there's that question of, like, how much difference do they really make in the game? You know, when you're kind of playing, do they really have that much effect? So I guess we're just going to finish up. I just want to say to you guys, you know, would you, you know, I don't want to start talking about the next title, but just as a general point going forward into the future, would you prefer to see kind of more experimental gameplay, or would you like to see it kind of reined back in a little, really strong core gameplay, and then just build a little around that, so you end up with a tight quality product?
I think that we will not see a significant change in them pushing the boundaries of what is possible on coming titles, both not only because Star Wars Battlefront will likely be the next major DICE title that will come out, and in my opinion, it will be a utilizing the same Frostbite 3 engine with a lot of the same elements of gameplay. It will certainly not be set in the 21st century, but it will be essentially a reskinned version of Battlefield 4, much like how Battlefield 21 and 42 was a reskinned version of Battlefield 2. Now, I'm not saying that there's not going to be nothing new about it. There certainly will be, but I don't think that in terms of order of magnitude, there'll be any significant difference in terms of what we'll see. That being said, for the games after Battlefront, I don't think we'll see much of a difference either, only in that we'll see greater optimization of the engine for next-gen consoles, which consoles will always be the limiting factor in terms of hardware potential. And so we may see simply more of it, more of the Levolution, more of the ability to have 64 players and or even more potentially.
What would you like to see, though? What do you think is the important factor to focus on as a gamer and as kind of to build a successful product that has good longevity? What do you think is the important aspect there?
Well, in terms of longevity, we only can look at Call of Duty to see that they have remained consistent in terms of their core gameplay, and once they got something good, they stuck with it. That being said, what is that for Battlefield? I don't know. Pushing the edge has been a core element of their design for a long time.
Yeah.
But we look at what Frostbite 3 is capable of and how scalable it is as hardware continues to develop. And I think we'll simply be able to see more of what we already see, but in greater volume and in greater effects. And that's a good thing.
Jake?
So you want me to answer what does it sound?
The 20 questions that I just asked you.
Yeah,
No.
I was just I think I know what I want to say. I'm just making sure I cover it all.
Yeah, it's about the core gameplay. So do you want
I personally want them to keep being ambitious because Battlefield has never been the game that you think, oh, well, that's just the bare minimum. Whereas, I mean, if you think, let's say Battlefield 3, they're pretty safe. They play it safe. They don't go out of their way to make these big open environments. One of the best things that I think brought people to Battlefield, which is like the trolling type videos and like just the goofing around and the C4 dirt bikes.
Yeah.
How many games can you do that? And I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Like even PlanetSide, I consider that one of the biggest, most, obviously it's the biggest game there is on the market in terms of expansiveness. But I just don't think there's any game out there that you can just play however you want to play like Battlefield does. So I personally would like them to see them push further, to continue to get better using the consoles. I think that the gameplay aspect will probably remain a lot the same. I mean, the gunplay in Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 3 are pretty similar for the most part, which I consider to be the best thing about Battlefield. I mean, think about how many games out there have the gun mechanics and just the solid gunplay that Battlefield 3 has, and to some extent Battlefield 4. It's hard to tell with all the
that's what I mean. It's kind of weird they kind of went backwards, but Battlefield 3 did have really solid gameplay once they'd ironed out all the creases, because let's not forget this as well, there was a lot of issues there,
the Great Suppression.
And people forget this so quickly, they just forget it so quickly. But I think I really do feel like they definitely should do that. I mean, they've got to keep reaching, because that's what it always has been, and I would rather they try, and I mean, it's easy for us to say that, when you're dealing with massive budgets and people's jobs. When you're dealing with gamers, but I mean, have a little sort of compassion for the people working in these places. You're dealing with people's jobs and lives and livelihoods. I mean, that's another difficult thing. It's very easy for people to sit back in their chair and be like, yeah, you should push the boundaries and fail or not, reach for the stars. And then it's like, okay. On the other hand, people have got to earn a living. So it's kind of it's a tricky one. But
I mean, One last thing I do want to point out before we wrap up, because I know it's getting kind of long, is
Yeah.
I was looking at the sales figures on Battlefield 4 for the next gen consoles, and they're within around like approximately 10 to 15 million or 10 to 15,000 of what COD Ghost sold. So
Really?
That's
it
very
appears
interesting.
to be that for the most part, this is something to do with the console transition.
Yes.
Well,
Because
yeah, it will be. I mean,
COD
that'll be a
Ghost
big
hasn't
effect.
even sold a million.
Yeah.
It sold a million on PS4 and I think around 900,000 on Xbox One.
Yeah.
And I think inversely, Battlefield 4 has sold like 900,000 on PS4 and I think around like 75 to 80 or
It's
750 to
yeah.
800,000
Yeah.
on Xbox One.
That's totally a huge issue. And do you know what else? Like, it's exactly what Daskro said, which is that it's a really bad thing to release the title in. I don't know. I don't know if I want to say. I don't want to say unfinished or broken because I can't believe that they sort of would get to a point and be like, well, it's not finished, but whatever. So I think it's more kind of like a problematic release. So it's really bad to have a problematic release because exactly like Daskro said, and exactly like you're saying, Jake, is that when the next gen consoles are out, well, not everybody gets them at release. So you don't see this huge wave of purchases like you would if it's been out for quite a while. And then the difficulty of the release and then the negative sort of PR impact that that has is going to affect long-term sales. So overall, it's not a good situation, is it really?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just thought it was an interesting statistic to bring up since we had talked about it.
Yeah.
I think that puts this whole conversation we've been having sort of in perspective of what's the deal with sales and
Yeah.
is the game struggling with maybe it's not as struggling as bad as we think it is, you know? I mean, a lot of people might be hesitant to buy the game on their current gen platform because they've heard it's kind of not the full experience, so they're like, "Oh, I'll wait till I get a next gen." And
Yes.
since the consoles have been hard to find, they have been a little bit hesitant to buy Battlefield 4. So I think it's a realistic possibility that come March to May you see a huge bump in
Yeah.
sales.
Yeah.
Because I did see an Xbox One at Walmart today, so which I
Yeah,
rarely
yeah,
go
I
to.
know.
So
I think that that you're right, and I think that you're right. Sort of middle of next year, the tables may turn, and for another reason, the fact that people, even though people hear a lot of PR and stuff like this, well, that's all very well and good, but then give it a few months' time, and then they sort of people look back at it and they're like, hey, that game, it's still doing, it's a big game, and hey, there's $10 off it now or whatever, and they sort of see and be like, well, they fixed all the problems that were there initially, so maybe I'm going to get back into it now. So I think we'll see that. I mean, look at other sites. I mean, it's not a game, but the PS3. I mean, it had really dodgy sales to begin with. It was not good, and then over the life of the system, picked up really high towards the end. That's obviously a completely different situation, though. But I mean,
yeah,
I think the point is that initial sales don't always represent the true value of the product over the lifespan. So we'll see how it turns out. Anyway, guys, we should probably wrap up now. It's been quite a long one today, but I think pretty good. I really enjoyed this discussion. Let us know, guys, your thoughts below. As always, we'll try and get on and interact and reply to your comments and thoughts. I'm sure you guys are very vocal about some of the issues in the game themselves, and tell us your experiences with Battlefield 4. What do you think about it? And try to sort of, as I say, get involved, answer some of the things that we've been talking about. Do you think that they've sort of aimed too high? What are the core elements of the game that you would like to see remain? What's important to you in Battlefield? What's important to you as a Battlefield player? What would you like to see them focus on in the future? Not necessarily just from a gameplay perspective, but also from the kind of principles of the company itself, what they should sort of focus on as a view to giving gamers. Thank you to Daskro, thank you to Jake, and I'll see you guys next time for some more Battlefield Roundtable.